So what I'm going to do is, obviously, before I start off, just quickly recap in terms of the presentation that we did last time and where we stopped. And what we're going to do is obviously move on to learning outcome 2 and learning outcome 3.
Okay.
Right. The main thing in this particular unit is that, as you know, the assignment from ATHE is based on the fact that you are looking at doing a office relocation project. So I've got a couple of documents open on my screen. You're able to see the screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I'll tell you what are these documents, and obviously some of them I'll email them to you, and they'll also be available on Moodle. Now, keeping in mind the context of the assignment in particular, which is to do with the office relocation, what we did last time was we basically studied something which is on the PowerPoint slide here, which is the project management process. Briefly looked at some of these stages of how initiation is done, how do we do the scoping of the project. Then once the scoping is done, we can break that down into work-based structures. And when it is broken down into WBS or work-based structures, we look at teams, delegation of responsibilities. And then because any project that we undertake is always dependent on two variables, time and cost. So if the costs, cost can spiral or can go up with the time if the project is not completed in time. And the other bit that we look at is if sometimes resources are required more than what we initially planned for, then again the costs go up. So there are three factors in particular that we looked at, which is cost, time, and human resources, and that is what generally covered in the first part or the first learning outcome. We also looked at briefly, each of these steps in one or two slides, which gave you some idea in terms of when we look at feasibility of the project, we look at three different types. One is the project feasibility overall. Then we look at technical feasibility and also look at operational feasibility, economic feasibility, and then we relate them to time and costs. Apart from that, what we also did was very briefly, I did send across to you a handout which was to do with understanding what project management methodology you will be using. Yes. So there are 12 different types of methodologies, and obviously when we look, picking up that you will use actually to, into the, for example, the project or the assignment. I sent you a handout which was this on the screen, which is Prince 2. Prince 2 projects in control environment, is one of the most popular project management methodologies in the UK, and it's easy to understand because. And it takes care of, the advantage of this is that it takes care of three different factors. It takes care of the stakeholders in particular. It looks at the feasibility of the project, and it also has processes in place to be able to monitor quality and also look at changes at times when you, work and undertake this for doing the project. So this is one of the most popular ones, but apart from that, there are lots of other project management methodologies that you can look at, like Crystal Water methodology, there is PMP, there is Six Sigma. You also look at, methodologies like, which are related to total quality management. Sometimes they kind of overlap with a project methodology that you undertake. So this was the handout that I sent to you, and the idea is we are going to be concentrating on at least studying one in a bit more detail. And I think from a point of view of UK and obviously looking at which one is used more widely across the world, I will concentrate on something called the Prince 2. So that is where actually we stopped in terms of the LO1 last time, and that presentation is due in email and also on Moodle. Now today, what we are going to do is I'm going to send you a couple of handouts. They will cover bits and pieces of some of the LOs that we're going to discuss. Now, because this is like an operational view, which means you have to, do it and have then and build the understanding after doing the practical in terms of the project, in terms of this office relocation project. What I've done is I've broken this down into, 4 parts, and there are 4 PDF documents in particular. So this is one which kind of recaps that you see on the screen here. This is one which kind of recaps, the discussion that we did on the last time slides. So it covers basically a bit of an overview. It will be helpful for you to do a bit of revision on this. So what is a project? What are some definitions of projects, like, what is Prince2? There is an association of project management, and they might also be helpful for you to do your assignment.
Okay.
Now, some of the parts that we look at is, why do projects fail? So here the feasibility comes in. Technical, sometimes you do not, kind of estimate the requirements on the economic side, the human resources side, technical feasibility, or even operational feasibility. And these are reasons which come up here as an activity which I put, which is why projects fail. Then we talk about what is project management, which are the couple of first few slides which talk about the whole process of initiation, charter, scoping, work-based structures. Definition covered in a bit more detail, gives you an overview of a project life cycle. And then what we do is, in the handout, I've tried to relate it to, the assignment brief. And then we talked about things in this slide, which was feasibility study. How do we break it down into different types? And then what we talked about was the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders who are involved in doing the project, things like the project manager, the project teams, the executive sponsor, the main person who has the money and, kind of sponsors the project. And then how do we look at project structures, which is nothing but work-based structures. Okay. So this is the first handout, which I will send it to you, because we have covered this in the last, last time. Now, the second one, which I will look at, which we will try and cover today, is the one which basically will move on to, the learning outcome 2. And here, what we are looking at is studying the roles and responsibilities of different members of the team in project management. So we are going to study and focus on things like, the structures in particular. How do you form up a project structure, or a project management team, essentially, as we call it? So we look at some of the structures there, and that kind of relates to what we are trying to cover here is the learning outcome 2, which is be able to design a structure and a plan, and then initiate and manage that project. So what we are going to do is in general talk about the structure of the team, which who forms the management, who becomes the project manager, how are his responsibilities looked at, what is the interrelationship between the project manager and his team and the management, and that is what we will today study in learning outcome 2. So looking at the structures, different types. So here we are going to look at structures which can be formed, things like just very briefly, but we'll take up in detail things like sometimes you have a matrix structure, sometimes you have a functional structure, sometimes you have a hierarchical structure, and which structure is best and some of these structures can be applied differently to different projects when you do. So one structure does not fit all. So sometimes when you do projects, you have to appropriately pick up a structure depending on the size of the project, the scale of the project, the money involved in the project, and you have to put the appropriate structure in place, which works and which works to deliver the result for which the project team is being formed. And then we will look at the roles and responsibilities in particular for the project manager in detail. And this will basically give you some idea in terms of what is the role of the person who becomes the overall project manager. The person who actually has the full control of the project and is basically responsible for running the operation, delegates the responsibilities, and has the authority to be able to take decisions for changes, for quality control, to also shut down certain sections of the project or restart, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then we will discuss something which is, I'll show you an example of an assignment which will basically show you what is a project plan. How does a project plan essentially look like? And that idea would be to basically try and give you some perspective in terms of understanding that how you will look at in particular working out a project plan in the case of office. For example, in this case, we are looking at office relocation. So we'll try and draw up a plan which basically relates to the assignment, and will also give you understanding in terms of how plan is developed as far as the project planning is concerned. Okay? So essentially, we're going to be looking at covering these topics today, and this idea would be to, I'll send you this particular handout and also the details, so that you have everything available at your end to be able to understand and develop the learning outcome 2. Now, slightly related to this is the learning outcome 3, which basically talks about alternative project team structures, because sometimes the projects are quite huge and they go across different offices. For example, if there is a project of modernization of IT being done in NHS, then it will start off with, say, one NHS, within the NHS, it will start off with one particular trust or hospital, and then it will be slowly and gradually expanded to other hospitals. So sometimes you have to form alternative teams which work within different locations to be able to, do the projects. So there'll not be one project manager, who works in, say, the Hertfordshire, Trust, or the Greater Manchester Trust, or maybe the East London Trust, but there'll be a group project manager, and that group project manager will have different project managers which work in various hospitals and report to him, but they are responsible for implementing, the type of, say for example, they're responsible for implementing the tasks within their own hospitals. But reporting happens to the head office or the group project manager. So that is where the alternative project team structures come in, and that's related to task, learning outcome 2. So we'll expand into that. And when you have lots of people working within the project, what you will see is the communication and interpersonal interaction between people becomes very important. So that what I say is somebody exactly understands what I mean by that, and for that reason, the communication to a certain extent is also a task that we pick up, in learning outcome 3. So how do we look at interpersonal skills? How do we look at effective communication, and why these are important in ensuring that the project, the people working within the as a team within the project are able to work well, communicate well, and there is a good atmosphere in terms of working towards the main objective.
Okay.
And what we're going to do is stop here. So I'm not going to pick up quality management and change proposals, which we will cover up in the next learning outcome along with learning outcome 4. So this is where we will look at today's coverage of task 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 3.1, and 3.2. And my handouts will concentrate on providing you material for these. So that you have good amount of material, 1, to attempt the assignment, 2nd, to develop a deeper understanding on some of these tasks and the learning outcomes, and last but not the least, we'll relate it to the office relocation project, which is directly relating to the assignment brief for this particular module. Okay, now so just briefly running going through this particular handout which I've created. So here what we are looking at is, let's understand first the project organization, and what does this consist of. Now, as you see in any department, any business, or even in our households, when we look at, there is some sort of a project, or there's some sort of an organizational structure. You have the husband and the wife, and they kind of form the 2 pillars. Underneath you have children, and then you have a lot of other things which is to do with maybe external friends, in terms of external parties, which could be friends and relatives, which could be suppliers or partners. It could be external services that you take, like Sky and water, or council and things like that. But if I have to put this into some sort of a context, it will form some sort of a structure. Even at the home, you have grandparents, underneath that you have parents, and then you have kids and you have grandkids. So it becomes some sort of a tree or a structure, isn't it?
Yes.
So similarly, in any business or any organization, if we are going to embark on something to accomplish, that means if a goal has been set that we want to, say, cross and run, say for example, the London Marathon, what you have to do is you have to put some sort of some steps in place which kind of become a timeline, and that timeline then can later be developed into a structure. So for example, you might need a coach. The coach might give you coaching on how to maintain fitness, how to increase stamina, and then accordingly it will slowly get into some sort of a structure. So similarly, when we do projects in particular, there is a project organization structure that we need to form, and this structure typically looks something like this. If you see on the screen, if it's big enough, I can increase. If it's big enough, So this project structure, when you look at, basically what tends to happen in this case is, you have always somebody who sets the objective, who has the money, who has the resources, and he or she has the vision in terms of why this is to be done, and they basically become something part of the, let's say, the board, or somebody who's probably like the chief executive, or somebody who's at the top of the organization. Underneath that, that person's vision is actually translated into some objectives, and that is primarily done by the project board. Now the project board, imagine this as an example, that NHS, for example, is now looking at implementing changes to cyber security, or their own IT infrastructure because of the recent hack which had happened. Now in this case, what has happened is that the top management in the NHS, which is the Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt, people in the NHS Trust, people in the King's Fund, which basically decide where NHS and how NHS works, have got together, and they basically form nothing but the corporate or the top management here. Underneath that, what happens is the NHS Trust, or the board, basically, which creates all the policies and guidelines, has then formulated that what has been the outcome of or effect of the attack on certain hospitals, the loss of time, money, and also the cancellations of operations and the patients which actually suffered because of that. Now this board has basically created a remit that we are going to implement, that these are the necessary changes which NHS has to implement now within the hospital structures to make it IT infrastructure more robust and more having more security. Now this board, essentially, which gets formed, actually formulates the key objectives of what steps we are going to take for us to be able to basically look at that this does not happen again. And within that board, you'll have somebody who's the users, somebody who's the executive, and somebody who's the supplier, because NHS is not going to do everything on its own. So it has suppliers like Microsoft, Cisco. They might buy some infrastructure, and they will become, people from their management will also be acting as advisors of which equipment to buy, how many to buy, and how this will be better than the ones that they already have. They are a part of supplier side. The senior members in the board is the people who are actually involved in day-to-day operations and will know exactly the nitty-gritty of what is required and how it works. And then somebody who's the executive, who has management experience, but that person, because he has the end-to-end understanding of knowing the supplier side of things, the cost, the market, and the basics in terms of what is required, will be the executive. And he then becomes something called the executive sponsor. And between these three people, they firm up something which is called the project plan, and they then start to formulate something called a project organization. And they will then decide, okay, this is a project which will involve, say, £100 million example. And then within that, they need to implement this in 20 different trusts which are there in the NHS England. And each of the trusts will need a minimum team structure and an organization for them to be able to implement once the equipment and these things are finalized. So here, if you see, this project board then formulates a structure, and that structure will have maybe a project manager, somebody who has the experience and the prior experience, who has worked in the implementation of these hardware upgrades or technical upgrades. And then they will then in turn have a team, and then he will have some support administration things, people who will help him in terms of day-to-day work, operations, get the information, things like that. And there'll be somebody who monitors the quality in terms of the quality would relate to the fact that it is measuring the speed of implementation, costs involved, and when the implementation is happening, is it meeting the required objectives set by the board. And this particular bit, if you look at with the example which I explained, kind of becomes the project organization for implementing those cybersecurity measures within NHS. Is that okay? So in the case of, how do we relate this to the case of office, project that we are doing? So here, what I have to look at is primarily when I look at the office project. So here, what we are doing is basically drawing up a structure, which is, here I would say the project manager. And above the project manager, you will typically have somebody who's the CEO, who has decided that, what we need to do is basically have, move over the office from London to Banbury, is because the costs are going to be less, and it's going to be easier for the employees to kind of travel, work, and maintain. And underneath that, what he will do is the project manager will be given support to form an organization, which is, because the full office has to move, So he will decide which are the structures or departments which kind of move first, and then which can be moved slightly later. So for example, reception, or when you look at people in the front office, will actually need to move first, because when the calls are coming in, they need to be able to field the calls and do the coordination between the old office and the new office.
Okay.
Then slowly maybe he decides that finance department would move first, then the administration would move, and maybe towards the last the marketing department would move. And this kind of a structure then will become a structure that we will use for, maybe the assignment. So here, that is a small structure because it's smaller related to this side of the project organization, because here we have taken an example of NHS, and here we have taken an example of a small company moving office from London to Oxfordshire in order to save costs. Okay. Now going further, now just to recap in terms of what we are looking at now with regards to the project organization is, and it formed, it established something called an effective structure for the full project to work, or for the full process to work. Because if we don't have organization within the office, within the home, you don't make budgets in terms of what is going to be spent on home, grocery, bills and other things. If there is no organization, then you know very clearly everything can go out of control. So an organization is important to create a structure and give some sort of a process or a procedure for it to work. The other bits that we look at is it needs a structure, because sometimes you have people working within different departments who have to contribute towards this, the common goal. And because of that, what you need is a structure so that people clearly know what their role is, where their role starts, and where their role actually ends, and when they hand over to somebody else in the organization.
Okay.
It also creates flexibility, and in some cases, it creates dedicated responsibilities which the individuals are able to complete in a short period of time, apart from doing their day-to-day role, right? So here the person might be the project manager assigned for office relocation, could himself be the general manager of the office, and he also carries on. But because he's been given the additional task of moving the office from one location to the other, only a short-term project. That means it is only a 1 month or a 2 month activity. So he will continue to dedicate some time towards the office relocation, but on his other side, he will continue to, do his main responsibility and job essentially within the organization. Now, in order for him to drop the resources and help him out to look at this relocation, he forms up something called a team, and that team basically takes directives from the project board, because they have to refer to the guidelines. I can't come in and say, okay, can we move office from London to maybe outer London, because the CEO or the project management executive sponsors clearly said we need to move to this location. That is where he has to look at. So the objectives cannot change. And in all cases, the team members, which are a part of his team that he picks up. So he is given the freedom to be able to handpick the team, because in that case, he needs to make sure that whatever people he picks up in the team, they are going to play ball with him. They're going to listen to him. If he delegates roles and responsibilities, they are going to successfully, kind of go and attempt and complete it. And they are going to, in general, create and work with him collectively to achieve the objective set. So things become clear when you create a project organization. Is that okay?
Yes. Okay.
Now, how do we differentiate slightly between a project organization and program management, or the board here, essentially? People who are the, above the board. That means in organizations, sometimes you see that you have the chief executive, but the chief executive reports to the board of the company, or somebody senior enough in the company which forms the board, and they might be members and people from different organizations, from the industry, from the sector. So program management is basically related to projects, but it depends. It brings across a lot of different objectives in terms of why this project is required. So when you look at office relocation, going back to the assignment again, now why is the office being relocated? It could be that the company is being restructured to save costs, and one of the biggest costs which the board looks at in terms of payouts every month is the cost of infrastructure offices in London. So what they decide is that in terms of long-term vision, in terms of long-term perspective for the company, it is going to be important to save these costs. And because this is long-term and the company is going to work and function and all that, they are going to look at things that they can change, which will help the company save money or maybe run the same budgets, for a longer duration, because they're going to be able to kind of, minimize those costs for the long run. So office relocation as a project requires a lot of planning and approvals, and they have done some research, and that research has been done by an independent agency, and that is all initiated by nothing but the people who work within the corporate office or the head office or the board of the company. And they have what is called the strategic view, of the organization in mind. And some of these changes which are done when you look at doing project management, these are changes which are implemented keeping in mind 3, 5, 7, 10 years for the organization. So office relocation from London, they know as the cost of are spiraling, they decide to move because they see a substantial saving in costs for the company, which can be used somewhere else. And that is why this move is taken, because this is not a small move. This is a one in 10 years, 1 in 15 years kind of a move which the company does. Right? You might not form a organization to do a small project like, say, for example, it depends. But, sometimes when you get to work within organizations nowadays, there's a lot of awareness for being environmentally friendly. So what most companies and departments, they do is they say, okay, print only if it's necessary to print. Save the environment, save paper. But that's a very small project which is working within the department. And in this case, they might not need to form an organization or anything, but just create general awareness by maybe adding a signature to the email, maybe putting up a poster within the department, and maybe one of the days they might do a workshop in the year to explain the benefits of why this needs to be implemented. But beyond that, there is no specific person working into the project or the requirement. But on the other hand, when you look at if you have to implement the launch of a product, for example, if NHS is going to launch, maybe now make available certain types of medicine, like a flu jab project, which normally they initiate during winters, because under 7 for children and over 60 for people, they make available flu jabs. Now, this is implemented across all the surgeries, GP surgeries, across all the hospitals, across all the NHS trusts and hospitals. What it does to show is that because it is done year on year, every time during the winters, there needs to be a project team which centrally monitors the effectiveness of this campaign. And that is where you see that this program, which because it is run year after year, it is not a project, it is a program within the NHS. And that is why it is called program management, because you do it year on year. See the difference?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So within two concepts, I might do a project which is a one-time activity, but a program management becomes if I do the same activity year on year at the same time and it is done repeatedly, then it becomes program management rather than project management. But the team initiation within the two, or the structure of the team in between the two, always needs to be created, and that kind of is the same structure within minor differences, but the team structure, the two different types of these things remain pretty much the same. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, looking at going further, in the handout, what I've done is basically explain slightly briefly that, with the in terms of the what is the roles and responsibility of the board, how is the board appointed by this chief executive, and the sometimes when you see you have annual general meetings, for the organization, and when you have these AGMs for the organization, what you tend to see is that sometimes these AGMs, when they happen, they are the ones which basically end up, taking the roles and responsibility, and then they kind of create that goal for the board to follow. So board here has the mandate to appoint the project manager, the people who will be responsible for running this particular, project. And it plans, so board has various responsibilities. It approves the plans, authorizes, any deviations. Now the project manager, I'll give you a different example. When you look at Dubai, for example, in Dubai, the Burj Al Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world. Now that project, when it was initiated by the, the Crown Prince of Dubai, there were some initial estimates which were done on the project. So, for example, they said that the tower will cost 1.1 billion, dollars, and they invited bids and everything. But when the project actually started, they saw that the costs for the project started to rise. So the final tower actually costed maybe in excess of 1.6, 1.7 billion. But these costs, because they were not small costs, they were actually approved in principle by the Crown Prince because the state was funding it. So these were major deviations from when the Crown Prince signed off the plan saying that, okay, I'll sign off this budget and the 18 months this tower is going to be built. But if you see, it was never built in 18 months. It took 2.5 years. The cost went from 1.1 to 1.6. So these basic things were actually signed off by the board. And because they were presented back to him saying that, okay, we underestimate the cost of steel, the currency fluctuation, the cost of labor, things like that. Now, in that case, that is the responsibility of the project board. So what they do is they compile all the findings, and the project manager then presents it to the board, and the project board then looks at those findings cautiously and then agrees those plans which are deviations from the original plan. And in some cases, the project manager does not have the authority to sign off an additional budget or a requirement for adding more manpower and things like that unless it is approved by the board. Now, it's needless to say, and I think you will understand, is that when you do small projects, for example, within the house or in a small business, you might not have a board. The project manager might itself be the the managing director, and the managing director might also be the authority who approves everything. So if you have a big enough organization, big enough project, then you have these various levels in terms of the levels of the structure as well. And the project board, if you run into problems, for example, I know that if you recall, in the same tower construction, there were a number of deaths which happened because workers, because of health and safety issues. A lot of, I think about 11 or 12 workers lost their life. Now, that is a complex situation which only the board can handle. So compensation to the family members and, things like that, they were then approved by the board. So board assumes responsibilities which are beyond the project manager's remit or beyond his scale of, operation. And they are the ones which take these difficult kind of, decisions, complex decisions, and then pass the, directions to the project manager to be able to implement it. And certainly what we do is we look at the role of somebody, who's the senior responsible owner or the executive. Now, we use the term called the executive sponsor. The term executive sponsor is basically the person who actually funds the project. So in this case, when you look at the Burj Al Khalifa, the project was actually funded by the Crown Prince or the state. So that is where he has the executive power to sanction the budget. And if he pulls the budget, the tower will collapse, the construction will stop. And he's the one who makes the business case. So his team would have made the case that, okay, if you have the tallest building and, offices and this and that, it'll bring in tourism. The benefits of this will be that, we will have, large scale offices and other bits moving to the tower and in general to Dubai, and that will bring in more money. So they look at the overall objectives, and that is why he's called he has a vision in mind. He has some sort of a long-term objective in mind. And that is why he's called the executive sponsor. Okay. Now, there are other pieces that we look at, for example, when we look at senior user, executive, and suppliers and things like that, the basic responsibilities which I explained here. And it gives you an idea that, okay, the senior user would be, say, for example, on the 82nd floor of the Burj Al Khalifa, they put an aquarium, which has about 200 different species of, marine life, which are found in and around the UAE waters or around the Emirates. So this was something which maybe was introduced as a suggestion by one of the senior members within the project team, saying that, it should also not just be an office building, but it should also be a tourist spot or a tourist location. And let's look at incorporating this into the, into the tower. And this is something which might have come across at a later stage because they would have looked at a lot of interest around the building, around the city where the development is happening, and some of these things were incorporated into by the suggestions of, the senior user. Now, the project manager basically, now what is the role of the project manager? We understand. So project manager is basically responsible for day-to-day operations of ensuring what has been set out in the charter of the project. That means the building will have, say, 118 floors or whatever it is. the height of the building has to be 1 mile, whatever they were set out. Now the project manager has to ensure that how do we achieve these goals, and he then looks at the day-to-day running of the activities. So he will break them down into something called work-based structures, certain phases: task 1, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, and in phase 6 actually the building was handed over to the decorators. And once the building was approved and it was done, so his part was to hand over to decorators, so that then the decorators could actually start putting in, furnish the offices, the building, the flat, and all those things. The project manager's main responsibility is to ensure that whatever has been planned out in the charter, the project charter, is actually implemented to the core. He has to make sure that what has been defined in the goals have to be broken down into smaller activities, and those activities have to be met on time. Those activities have to achieve the results which they've been set for. So he's responsible for producing those plans for those activities. He's responsible for managing the manpower resources, which is in terms of budgets, technical resources, infrastructure resources. He puts the monitoring process in place, how and when he reviews the team, the people who are working on that. And then in certain cases, he also, not in certain, in mostly all cases when Prince2 is involved, he also looks at what is risk, how is risk mitigated, and he also looks at how change needs to be implemented to mitigate or lessen the effect of that risk. Now, when they started to look at, just going back to the same example of Burj Al Khalifa, when they started to go beyond the 82nd floor, what they found was that on certain days, wind and heat became a factor with hampered working of, working on the construction in terms of the unit. And then he had to come up with an alternative plan of how everything in terms of material will be airlifted to the 82nd story, which will become a story of, which will become a floor wherein all the raw materials will be stored. And slowly and gradually, they will start construction upwards of the other floors. So it's like saying this was not anticipated, it was known, but because he had to plan this, that up to 82nd story, everything will go as per planning. But when we reach that floor, everything else in terms of construction will actually come together to that floor, and from that floor, it will then go across to the construction going upwards into other floors. And this is something which he managed in terms of, the change, and they have to manage in terms of the risks, because at that height, there are lots of other things which come into play. And then he has to report the developments of how it is going, because up till the 82nd floor, the process of construction was going smooth, it went very fast. But beyond the 82nd floor, there were helicopters involved, there were heavy lifts which were involved, and the material was slowly and gradually going up the floors, because if you imagine the height, it was difficult. So these things were implemented after he reported things to the board, and the board approved at each phase of each floor. 83rd floor complete, okay, next floor 84. Then they decided that, okay, that's the reason they decided that they'll put the aquarium there, and that floor is actually the size of 3 floors, because that was used initially in the construction for them to be able to bring in all the material from the ground floor or from the ground up to that floor to construct the higher floors, going up to 122 or 123.
Oh my God.
So this planning is part of project management's work, and he has to implement this. And obviously there was not one project manager involved, there were a team of 27 different project managers who had a group project manager on top, and they all did this planning because of the scale of the project, as you can see.
Okay.
Right? So we'll look at some of the other roles and responsibilities in a bit more detail. And under him, he has, obviously, as I mentioned to you, there were 27 project managers and there was a group project manager. So the 27 have their own teams working. So there could be somebody for engineering, somebody for electric, somebody for plumbing, somebody for construction, somebody for workers. So each project manager was managing different departments, and that led to the creation of something called different teams. And these teams then worked in unison. Every morning there was a drill. At 6 a.m. in the morning, construction started early because of the temperatures. It used to stop at 11 o'clock. Then construction used to start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So these team structures, which were put in place 6 o'clock in the morning as health and safety drill, and then after that, so these were roles and responsibilities which became a part and parcel of that whole project for a span of almost 2.5 to 3 years. And there was no way that this could have been done. So there was not a single day on which the health and safety drill was not done. People, were not medically checked who are working at higher floors. This was a part and parcel of daily routine of, when they came into the site to start work. And this is this was the bit which was maintained by the team managers who were working under the project manager. So imagine 2,500 people working on the site, and there is a general manager who's the project manager for managing human resources. But within that project, under that project manager, you had about 20 different team managers, which were differently managing different types of people working on the project. So there are site surveyors, there are construction workers, there are welders, various types of people were all under different team managers, and each of them were responsible for managing their team so that there is perfect coordination and there was perfect unison in terms of working on a daily basis in that project. Okay. Now, last but not the least, what we look at is two other support bits, which is without which the project management does not work. One is project assurance. Now, what is project assurance? At every step of the way, because the project has a lot of phases, every step of the way there is a quality check which is done to ensure that whatever has been done so far is actually meeting the requirements set by the project board. And that person is an independent person, and that's why these dotted lines, he is a functional member of the project management team, but he indirectly also reports to the project board at the senior level. He does not directly report to the project manager. He works with him, but his role is as an outside party to ensure that whatever guidelines, whatever processes have been asked by the project board are actually being implemented. So he's like an inspector, he's like the police. So he basically kind of comes in and checks on the various things being done on a daily basis, weekly, monthly basis, and then independently reports the activities to the board. So he's like an observer, he's like an independent person who is responsible for ensuring quality, change, and ensuring that everything is being delivered as per, or everything being done by the project management team is actually being delivered and done as per the project charter, which has been defined by the project board. And his main role is basically to ensure compliance with the strategy, which is nothing but the guidelines which have been set out in the charter. He looks at adherence to standards. For example, health and safety drills in the morning, have they happened or not? Fire evacuation drills every day have happened or not? So those kind of things are the things which the project assurance team does to ensure external monitoring as far as the working within the project management is concerned. And last but not the least, there are lots of roles, but just to look at focusing on 3 ones, they also look at focusing on something called ensuring that the integrity and viability and scope and communications are all bits and pieces which are adhered to. So example here would be, when you look at the health and safety drill, then you might just do an health and safety drill, but in the health and safety drill, there are 3 or 4 different things which are looked at. There is a head count which is done. There is also, the mandatory requirement for workers at the site to be able to wear some sort of clothing, which basically is a colored clothing, so that they're easily able to identify them. And then the third bit is, you need to look at if all the workers at the site also wear a helmet, which protects them in the case of any exigencies. So the monitoring of the fire drill is done in exact essence by the project assurance team, because they also look at compliance, they also look at the integrity and how it is being conducted. So you might have the drill being done, but the workers are not wearing a helmet, they're not wearing the colored clothing, and they're not being briefed in terms of, it's just for the sake of being done. So what they then do is they basically look at ensuring that this is done, and it is done following the standards and procedures which have been set out in the drills. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And last but not the least, because if you understand, if this is such a big project which is happening, there are lots of people who will work within the support role. Yeah, the support role will be, support role will be people who basically work within administration, operations, or work, say for example, as a receptionist, PA, or whatever it is, and they kind of support the main members of the team, because they are the ones who will look at documentation, maybe certain activities like photocopying and other bits and pieces, and they basically form the support team. So for example, dispatch of wages, printing of wage slips, handover of petty cash. So there might be a small finance department which is set up on the site, which looks after these things, but they are basically part and parcel of something called the support team. The actual finance department or accounts department might be in the head office, but the on-site office might be the office which is formed to, kind of settle the wages for workers on a daily basis who are working in that location. And they are the basically administrative back end of any project, depending on, what is being done. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
And last but not least, let's look at in terms of the roles and responsibilities and the skills of who becomes a project manager. Now, as you will understand, the person who basically works as a project manager is a person who primarily has maybe lots of skills or lots of multitasking, things which are required to work within that role. Now, if I have to understand, say for example, the main bits and pieces of who is going to be the project manager, it will be the person who has the authority. One is obviously he or she has the prior experience. That means they are able to work with different types of resources. They're able to work with different types of people. They have varied experience of working within the organization. So they have worked on smaller projects. They've worked in implementation. They worked in strategy. They've worked in, the operational side of things. And person in general who have, over the years managed and inherited skills which are required to be in that particular role. Now, in general, when we look at, the project manager, what we primarily look at is that the project manager is a person who is responsible finally for ensuring the end results of what has been set forth, for the project board. So if you're looking at office relocation, the person is finally going to be, reviewed on the fact that whether the relocation project was successful or not. Whatever he does, whether he puts 18 hours, 24 hours, whether he has a team, does not have a team, the project board will not be interested in understanding that. They would have said that, okay, we have asked you to do this project, you were supposed to plan, you were supposed to create the team, and at the end of it, we are looking at one responsibility putting on your shoulders is that this relocation should be successful. We should have minimum disruption in terms of working. We should have minimum people, leaving or, basically not agreeing with the organization. And then you have to look at ensuring that this is a success. So that is the main role of the project manager. Now, they might pick and choose a person who has the best, the interest of the organization at heart, is able to work with people, and is generally popular within the organization to work as a project manager. So that is the responsibility of the board. But once they pick it up, the project manager has to have a lot of skills and other things that he has to apply to make sure that the project actually works. And those are the bits that we look at within the qualities of or the skills of the person who becomes a project manager. So here he needs to have things in terms of soft skills and hard skills. Things like softer skills are called the interpersonal skills, which are skills like communication, skills which are team working, skills which are called leadership. He is effectively able to take decisions, and these are called as softer skills. So a person who gets into this role has these skills because these are required at some stage within the project to be effectively able to manage a team and make them do the work. The other bits that we look at is in the project manager, obviously he has the academic, experiential and technical capabilities to be in that role. That means he's a person who has that required qualification. He also has maybe the prior experience to work within that role, and that is the person who is actually picked up, for being the project manager. And then some other skills that people look at is in general things like, which are a part of softer skills, but are also a part of, things which he is supposed to work on and have, is that he should be able to build relationship. He should be able to solve conflicts. There should not be an attitude problem. So they look at these dynamics. That means he should be a good people's handler. He should be a person who should be able to work people, manage people, delegate work, and those are the bits which are important when we look at when the project manager will look at planning, controlling, and monitoring. Because if he has people within his team which do not like to be managed or do not like to be told or what to do and how to do, then he will have a problem in terms of the effective running of the project. So it is quite important when we look at that we need to create. This is directly related to one of the tasks, in the assignment, is that what we need to look at is demonstrate the interpersonal skills required for effective project management. And this slide basically talks about these skills which are required by the project manager to be able to manage, these things effectively when he's running the project.
Okay,
Now, talk about project structures. But when I started off initially, I did talk about, when we look at structures of organizations, different types, we look at different types of organizational structures depending on, the ones which primarily can be formed depending on the type of project and the scale of the project. So there are different types. One is hierarchical. You can have virtual, network, projectized, functional, and matrix. Now, just to cover one or two very briefly, I will look at, say, projectized structure. What does projectized structure means? Now, projectized structure means that here the organization itself is formed up or formed of people who have worked consistently within the projects. That means sometimes what happens is when you go to a consultancy organization to execute a particular task or ask them to give you a particular consultancy, is because that organization works like a project organization. They can become a part of your team. They can come in, become part of your team in terms of employment, work within a particular task or the goals which are given, and then they obviously go back and become their own company, and you carry on as a company on your own. Right?
Okay.
So in some cases, what you see is when I use the word projectized team structures, it basically means the company itself works as a project organization. They work as consultants, they work as project organization, and their role is primarily to basically work with companies or other large companies to ensure that the projects that they do become successful. And an example here given is that when you look at large, technical organizations like, say, Airbus, which is an example which has been taken here. Now, in this case, as you can see, the Airbus is a style, the Airbus in terms of the aircraft actually is, created or assembled in Toulouse in France, but the basic bits in terms of the various, things like the wings, the engine, the body, a couple of other, wiring, electrics, and all those things come across from different places in the world. So Airbus as a company is basically nothing but it works on a projectized team, because there are smaller teams which are working within, the remit of the creation of the aircraft, the bigger, the end product, but they are spread across the geography in different countries. So I think, if I remember correctly, there are 13 countries in which the material is actually manufactured for the Airbus. So when you look at these 13 different countries, the final assembly of the aircraft happens in Toulouse in France. So wings go from, Britain. I think some parts of it come from India. The body comes from China. Some bits and pieces come from other locations. And each of this location is nothing but working on a project. So their aim is to create the best of to the best of their ability as per the specification design, to create something which is mission critical, to bring together a product like an aircraft at the end of the day, which gets assembled in Toulouse. And this is nothing but a projectized organization, because each part of the organization works on only a specific part of that, aircraft. So wings, for example, the engines, for example, the assembly, for example, is all specific portions of, or parts of the project that they're working on. And that is why you will see that each organization here will have their own independent departments. So Britain, for example, is producing the wings. There is a finance department, marketing department, project department, HR, engineering, separate departments, but it is very specific to Britain. The work which is happening in India or China has a different department because of the countries involved, and they have a specific cost. They bill it centrally to the organization, which is, Airbus, but they work more or less independently, and that is why they are called projectized structures. Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages of this, and I think what we look at, one advantage is when you look at projects which involve different countries, which involved different geographies, which involved, talent and, resources coming from different locations. That way, the only bit which can work is this structure. But if everything is within one roof or under one roof, then in that case, you could have other structure like a hierarchical structure which could work. So it's a large office, like for example, if you look at an organization like NHS, there the hierarchical structure works. So the health secretary on top, the NHS trust, the King's Fund, basically as the project group, and underneath that you have this PCT, the CQC, Care Quality Commission, and then you have the hospital trust, the 20 hospital trusts, which basically manage the full NHS structure, right? And that kind of a structure primarily is nothing but, the hierarchical structure.
Yeah.
I'll try and show you this just in case, which might give you some ideas. And that is why it is called hierarchical, is because of the fact that you will get to see within the structure.
Okay.
Within the structure, you will get to see that the organization actually works like it's under one hierarchy, It's like one structure. So there is no reporting to, say, other countries or anything like that. And this is where the structure actually looks like. So this is a hierarchical structure, as you see. So the Secretary of State, you have the Department of Health, you have the NHS, trust, you have regional offices, and then you have basically underneath the hierarchy. That means under this, under this, under this, under this. That is how the structure is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So similarly in projects, what we look at is, I'll send you this handout in any case, but just to briefly explain this on the session, is that similarly you have different types of structures which need to be formed depending on the size and the scale of the project. But we need to know clearly what kind of structure to form, and this is something which is decided by the project manager.
Project manager. Okay.
Okay. So this is where I'm going to stop today, and I'm going to give you this particular handout for week 1 and week 2, and this is the write-up on project structures, how to look at forming up a project structure.
Okay.
3 different types which are most popular. One is projectized, the other is functional, and the third is matrix. These are the we see which are most commonly used. We do form project teams, or we do project manage in particular.
Okay.
And they are quite, in about 3 pages, we've explained them quite briefly, and gives you a good understanding of how and why they're formed and what are the advantages and disadvantages. Okay. Is that okay?
Lovely. Yeah, lovely.
So, any questions so far?
About the hierarchical and projectized, is it explaining? Is it in the slides, or do I have to find it out?
No, it is in the slide.
Okay, lovely. I'll go through later. Yeah.
No worries. And I'm going to send you a separate handout, which is this document that I've shown to you, here, which I'm to send you, which is to talk about the specifics of the roles and responsibilities of the project manager.
Yeah.
Look at it in a bit more detail, and why a project manager needs to have these skills: team building, decision making, motivating, communication, leadership, negotiation. And this handout you can directly use maybe for your project if you want to.
Okay. Oh, that will help, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Yeah, lovely.
No worries. So I will catch up with you same time next week, and we will discuss the LO3 and LO4 for moving ahead in this project management unit. Okay. And the one that we completed last week, which is the HRM 6.1. So my suggestion would be, basically, I know that you've asked me this question before with regards to what is the deadline for assignments. Now, we typically, you will see that we cover a unit in about 4 to 5 weeks.
Okay.
Depending on the learning outcome. So I spend maybe one lecture on one learning outcome. So we will cover this unit in 4 to 5 weeks. And after the coverage of the unit, when the unit has been completed, my suggestion is if you're able to send us a draft within the next 2 weeks, that is absolutely fine. Because then we'll give you some feedback on it, and if there are some changes that you need to do, you do those changes, and then we finalize that assignment, and that's kind of meeting the criteria, and we keep it aside.
Lovely.
Okay. So HR we've completed, I think last week, which was towards the end of June. So if you give me something by by weekend, this weekend, then I'll be able to give you some feedback on the assignment, and then if there are any changes, you make it, and then we'll finalize it and then keep it in the file for certification.
Okay.
So similarly for project management, my aim is that I will try and finish this unit by the end of this month, say 28, 29 July. We've got 2 more sessions to go, and you're looking at submitting a draft to us by say around mid of August, 15th August or something like that, and then we'll give you some feedback. You make the changes. Once it is ready, we'll box it off and then again keep it aside for certification.
Lovely, lovely. I'm just working on the research, the part. I gave you the proposal last time. I'm just working because last time you told me I've got 4 weeks. Then I said, okay, let me finish this first.
Yeah.
I'll do my best.
On the research one, you can take a bit more time because that assignment typically requires 6 to 8 weeks to be able to complete, because you have to collect data, or if you're doing secondary research, then you have to do a bit of research to be able to collect the findings and then present it. So that's absolutely fine, not a problem.
Okay, lovely. Okay.
No problem.
I'll work on the human resource management then.
As well. So you've got lots of time. There's no rush in that, and I think we can, if you need anything in terms of any handouts or any specific task that you're getting stuck in, just let me know and I'll send you a handout with regards to that specific task only.
Lovely.
So and you can move ahead rather than getting stuck and saying, okay, I'll attempt this later. If you get stuck, just drop me a quick email and I will, send you a specific handout, 2 or 3 pages, which will help you directly do that task or the assignment.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tama, for joining the class today, and I'll catch up with you next week.
Lovely. Thank you very much. See you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.